Why the world fears those who truly understand. Schopenhauer. We live in a world that celebrates intelligence on the surface degrees, accolades, clever arguments, fast answers. But the truth is, the world is deeply unsettled by those who go beyond that surface. Those who truly understand, not just facts, not just systems, but the nature of reality, the pain woven into existence, the illusions that structure our lives. These are the people the world quietly fears, rejects, or tries to silence. And this isn't a conspiracy, it's a psychological, philosophical inevitability. Because to truly understand, as Schopenhauer did, is to uncover what others spend their lives avoiding. It is to see not just the light but the shadow behind everything. And most people aren't ready for that kind of clarity. Schopenhauer was not an optimist. He didn't sugarcoat the world's suffering or pretend that progress would save us. He saw life for what it was, a cycle of craving, dissatisfaction, and illusion. He believed that most people move through life guided not by reason, but by the will, a blind, irrational force that drives all beings to strive, reproduce, consume, dominate. And the tragedy: the will is never satisfied. Once a desire is fulfilled, another arises. It is endless. The moment you think you've found peace, the will stirs again. This is the foundation of Schopenhauer's philosophy. And it's why those who understand are feared, because they see the mechanism behind the performance. They see the actors, yes, but they also see the strings, the puppeteer, the stagecraft.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
But what's even more unsettling is this: understanding doesn't make you popular. It makes you dangerous. Because when you understand the will, when you see the emptiness behind our striving, you stop playing the game. And when you stop playing the game, you threaten those who are still invested in it. Think about it. If you meet someone who no longer chases status, money, or validation, what do you feel? Curiosity, maybe. But also discomfort, maybe even judgment. Because that person, without trying, reveals the absurdity of your chase. They become a mirror most people don't want to look into. Here's the paradox: people are drawn to wisdom, but afraid of what it might cost. Because true understanding doesn't come cheap. It demands solitude. It demands the death of illusion. It demands that you see life not as a fairy tale, but as a brutal, beautiful, temporary phenomenon full of longing and loss. And most people aren't ready to pay that price. They want comfort, not clarity. They want answers that reaffirm their beliefs, not ones that shatter them. But if you've ever felt alienated by the world, if you've ever sensed that your insights push people away instead of pulling them close, you're not broken. You're just seeing too clearly in a room full of fog. Schopenhauer also believed that those who understand are destined for a kind of quiet exile, not because they are rejected with malice, but because they no longer speak the common language. They don't participate in the rituals of hope and denial. They don't pretend that happiness comes from the next promotion, the next relationship, the next trend. They see the cycle. They know the pattern. And that knowledge creates distance. But it also creates freedom. Because once you see the game, you're no longer trapped in it. You can walk away. You can observe without being consumed. You can suffer without being defined by suffering. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Have you ever found peace not through achieving more, but through seeing through your desire to achieve? That's the kind of peace Schopenhauer pointed toward. Not the fleeting joy of acquisition, but the deep stillness of detachment. Understanding doesn't numb you, it frees you from the tyranny of craving. But it allows you to move through life not as a desperate seeker, but as a silent observer. And this is precisely why the world fears those who understand, because they cannot be manipulated. And yet, here's the twist. Those who truly understand don't become cold or cruel. They often become more compassionate. Why? Because once you see how much suffering is embedded in the human experience, you stop blaming people for their pain. You stop judging them for their cravings. You understand that we are all caught in the same storm. Some of us just learn how to sit in it without screaming. Understanding doesn't make you superior. It makes you gentle. But the world doesn't always understand that gentleness. It mistakes detachment for arrogance, stillness for weakness, silence for ignorance. That's the tragedy of deep insight. It is often misread by those who are still living on the surface. So if you felt the burden of understanding, if you've watched people recoil from your clarity, back away from your honesty, shrink from your depth, remember this. It's not because you're wrong. It's because you're right. And the truth is heavy. It's sharp. It cuts through illusion. And most people aren't ready for that kind of wound. But don't dim your perception to make others comfortable. Don't pretend not to see. Because even if the world fears those who truly understand, it also needs them. Desperately. The eye that sees too much. Why clarity is a lonely power. Clarity is often praised in public, but punished in private. We say we want truth, transparency, and insight, but when someone actually gives us these things, we flinch. Because clarity doesn't just illuminate, it disorients. It unthreads the comforting illusions we've wrapped ourselves in. And for those who possess this clarity, those who, like Schopenhauer, see not just with the eyes but with the mind, life can become a profoundly lonely experience. Not because they are unloved, but because they are unrelatable. When you see the world in high resolution, when you notice the subtle hypocrisies, the hidden motives, the quiet suffering behind people's smiles, you begin to understand why so many choose blindness. Because seeing clearly is not just a gift, but it's a burden. And to the person who sees too much, small talk becomes unbearable. Not because it's trivial, but because it feels like a performance. You sit in rooms where everyone is smiling, nodding, pretending everything's fine, and you know it's not. You don't guess, you feel it. You see the tension behind the eyes, the sadness behind the laughter, the desperation behind the ambition. And you realize most people aren't talking to connect. They're talking to hide. Conversation becomes camouflage. Achievement becomes distraction. Fun becomes sedation. When you see through all of it, you're not trying to be cynical, you're just awake. But awakening doesn't guarantee connection. In fact, it often leads to isolation. Because clarity puts you at odds with the collective dream. When you don't believe what others believe, when you don't chase what others chase, when you don't fear what others fear, you begin to drift. Not because you want to, but because you must. And this is the paradox of deep understanding. It brings you closer to truth, but further from others. You become fluent in a language few can speak. And while some will admire you, many will retreat from you not because you're wrong, but because you're difficult to stand next to. You make them question things they've never dared to question, and that makes people uncomfortable. Schopenhauer knew this loneliness intimately. He wrote of the suffering of the world not as an abstract idea, but as a lived experience. He saw how people constantly distract themselves to avoid the rawness of being alive. And he knew that the clearer your perception becomes, the harder it is to participate in the rituals of denial. How do you laugh at shallow jokes when you see the pain behind the comedian's eyes? How do you celebrate mindless consumption when you know it's driven by inner emptiness? How do you chase romantic fantasies when you've seen how most love is rooted in projection, not presence? Let me ask you something that few dare to ask. If you could reduce your suffering by becoming more ignorant, would you choose to? That's the silent temptation for those who understand. To forget, to soften, and to return to the dream. But the problem is, once you see, you cannot unsee. The veil doesn't fall back down, it burns. And in that fire, something essential is revealed, your ability to stand alone, to walk through the world without needing others to validate your vision, but to carry your insight even when it isolates you. But it's not all bleak, because there's a strange beauty in this loneliness, a purity. When you're no longer trying to fit in, you begin to live truthfully. You stop contorting yourself to be liked. You stop agreeing just to belong. You start living in alignment with what you actually see. And while that might cost you some friendships, some opportunities, some temporary comfort, it gives you something far more valuable, integrity. And from that integrity comes peace. Not the peace of ignorance, but the peace of knowing who you are, knowing what matters, knowing what's real. And eventually you find others, not many, but a few, people who also see, people who have walked through the same fire. And when those souls meet, something rare happens, recognition. No masks, no games, just mutual understanding. And in that moment, the loneliness of clarity becomes the foundation of connection. Not the shallow connection of shared fantasy, but the deep connection of shared vision. So yes, clarity is a lonely power, but it's also a liberating one. And if you can bear the solitude it brings, you'll find a kind of freedom that most will never taste. And the freedom to live without illusion, and the freedom to think without permission, and the freedom to be without apology. The weight of insight, why the wise are misunderstood, mocked, and remembered. Last insight is not a parade with applause. It is a burden that often isolates before it inspires. We like to imagine that wisdom is something people recognize immediately, something that earns respect, admiration, and reverence. But if history teaches us anything, it's this: the truly wise are rarely understood in their own time. They are mocked, dismissed, ridiculed, or simply ignored. Their ideas are too unsettling, their clarity too sharp, and their words too honest. Most people are not looking for truth, they are looking for agreement. And when someone speaks from a place of deep inner clarity, untethered from the dominant beliefs of the time, their voice is not heard as wisdom, it is heard as disruption. Schopenhauer knew this well. During his lifetime, his work was largely overlooked. His contemporaries found him too pessimistic, too dark, too unwilling to play the optimistic games of progress and enlightenment. He didn't offer comforting visions of a better future. He didn't speak in the uplifting tone people wanted. Instead, he held up a mirror to the chaos of the human condition. He spoke of suffering not as an aberration, but as the default state of existence. And for that he was dismissed. It wasn't until much later, after his death, that his insights began to shake the foundations of philosophy, art, and literature. The world wasn't ready for him, but that didn't make him wrong. It just made him early. This is the weight of insight. It is often too much for people to carry. Because real insight isn't decorative, it is disruptive. It doesn't just add to what we know, it forces us to rethink what we know. And that is terrifying. Most of us build our lives on a set of assumptions about who we are, what the world is, what matters. And when someone comes along and exposes the cracks in that foundation, we don't celebrate them. We defend ourselves, we attack, we label them as negative, cynical, arrogant, or just too much. Not because they're wrong, but because they're right in a way that makes us uncomfortable. Let me ask you something dangerous. When was the last time you rejected someone not because they were wrong, but because they said something you weren't emotionally ready to hear? We've all done it. We've all turned away from someone who told us the truth too early, too clearly. It's not that we didn't understand them. It's that we did, and we weren't ready to confront what that understanding demanded. Because insight has consequences. It forces change. It demands responsibility. And that's why the wise are so often remembered after the world has caught up to them. We don't understand them when they're alive. We canonize them when they're gone, when their truth no longer threatens us. But here's the deeper tragedy. Many of the wise know this. They know they may never be understood. They speak anyway. They write anyway. But they create anyway. Not because they crave recognition, but because truth is its own reward. There's a kind of quiet heroism in that, to carry insight that isolates you, and to see clearly even when it costs you, to speak truthfully even when the world doesn't applaud, and may never. That is strength. That is integrity. That is what makes wisdom so rare. And yet, the wise are not bitter. They don't need validation to keep going, because they are not speaking for the crowd. They are speaking to the future. They are planting seeds that may not grow for decades. And they accept that. They live in service to something larger than approval. They live in alignment with truth itself. And in doing so, they leave behind something eternal. Not fame, not popularity, but clarity that transcends their time. Schopenhauer's legacy is proof of this. His influence didn't explode during his life. It grew slowly, silently. His ideas were picked up by Nietzsche, Wagner, Freud, Tolstoy, and countless others. He became a ghost in the minds of artists and thinkers who recognized, long after his death, that he had seen something they were only beginning to grasp. That is the fate of many who understand. They are remembered last, but once they are remembered forever. So, if you feel like your insight isolates you, if your vision feels more like a burden than a blessing, remember this: you are not alone. The path of understanding is narrow. It is steep. It is often walked in silence. But it leads somewhere real, somewhere beyond the noise. And even if the world doesn't understand you now, one day someone will. And when they do, your truth will matter more than you ever thought possible. Freedom beyond illusion. How understanding unlocks a life without fear. The most profound consequence of understanding, of truly seeing the world for what it is not bitterness. It's not cynicism. It's freedom. a freedom so deep, so unshakable, that it begins to dissolve fear at its root. Because fear in its many forms, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of death, is built upon illusion. Illusions about permanence, illusions about control, illusions about identity. And when you strip those illusions away, you don't become empty, you become free. That is the final, quiet gift of deep insight. Not just clarity, not just wisdom, but liberation from the invisible chains that bind most people without their knowing. Schopenhauer understood that most of our suffering doesn't come from events themselves, it comes from our attachment to certain outcomes. But we fear losing what we think we need. We fear becoming what we think we must avoid. We fear change because we believe stability is the default. But here's the truth. Life is change. Life is uncertainty. The world owes us nothing. The universe does not make promises. And when you understand that not just intellectually, but viscerally, you stop resisting reality, but you stop clinging, and in that release, fear begins to vanish. Not because danger disappears, but because your attachment to safety no longer defines you. The person who truly understands does not live recklessly, but they live bravely. They don't need constant reassurance because they've learned to find stability inside themselves. They don't chase distraction because they've stopped running from the truth of impermanence. And most importantly, they don't fear death not because they want it, but because they have accepted it. Schopenhauer wrote that life and death are not opposites, but part of the same continuum. And to live is to move toward death. To die is to return to the same nothingness from which we came. And if we didn't fear the nothingness before we were born, why fear it after we're gone? This understanding doesn't make life meaningless, it makes it precious. When you embrace the brevity of your existence, you stop wasting time. You stop pretending you'll live forever. You start speaking more honestly, loving more deeply, letting go more easily. You don't fear losing things because you understand that everything is already on loan. Nothing is truly yours. Not your body, not your achievements, not even your identity. And that's not depressing, it's liberating. Because once you realize you don't own anything, you stop being owned by anything. Let me ask you something radical. Who would you be if you truly feared nothing? Not in a reckless, careless way, but in the sense that you had made peace with uncertainty, with change, with loss, with death. What would you say that you've been holding back? What would you create that you've been afraid to fail at? Who would you walk away from that you've been afraid to disappoint? These are not easy questions, but they are the doorway to a new kind of life. A life rooted not in illusion, but in truth. Not in control, but in clarity. Not in avoidance, but in acceptance. Those who truly understand, like Schopenhauer, do not live afraid. They live awake, and being awake is not always comfortable. It means feeling the full weight of existence, seeing the suffering, acknowledging the absurdity. But it also means touching something eternal, something beyond fear, beyond ego, and beyond the endless craving of the will. And that is the deepest kind of peace. They're not the peace of sedation, but the peace of truth lived fully. So here we are, at the end. And maybe at the beginning. We've walked with Schopenhauer through the dark corridors of the human condition, and we've seen that what lies beyond suffering is not despair, but clarity. What lies beyond clarity is not isolation but integrity. And what lies beyond integrity is not fear but freedom. The world may fear those who truly understand, but those who understand no longer fear the world. Now that's power, quiet,